Hey, can you hear me?
Hello. Hey, Eli. Can you hear
Hey,
me?
Chris. Yeah, I can hear you, man. Is it cool if I do it with headphones so it doesn't create a feedback loop?
Yeah, it's fine. Absolutely fine. Not a problem at all.
Cool.
How are you doing today?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good, good, good. Ready for the long weekend?
I am, yeah, although I have a lot of schoolwork to do all weekend, but aside from that, I'm good.
Yeah. I'm not quite ready yet. I've got like a few hours to go and then,
Where are you at? Are you like on the West Coast?
yeah, I'm in San Jose, Silicon
Oh,
Valley,
okay, nice.
as they say. Where are you located?
Atlanta.
Oh, cool, cool.
Yeah.
It's not too late for you.
No, it's not bad. I mean, work just finished and then, yeah, so it's
Fun
perfect.
begin, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So tell me a
Cool.
little bit about yourself, your organization, and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I guess like I got an undergrad in accounting and realized towards the end of that I hated accounting, that it wasn't a great fit for me, right?
I did the same thing. I hated accounting too. I started off with
Okay.
economics and accounting and numbers, and I thought this is
Yeah.
not for me.
Yeah, I waited too long in the process was my problem. I think I figured out like towards the end of the last semester that it was very like cyclical and there were some interesting aspects that appealed to me like forensic accounting,
Yeah,
and maybe like auditing technical systems. But at the time, I was working full time and managing a data team, and that was a lot more interesting. I was like learning tons of new stuff about technology, databases, and so on.
hmm,
So I went ahead and finished my degree, but after that, moved into like a developer role. And so from the developer back in developer role, learned a lot more about SQL. Moved into senior role, IT management, and then we were a startup at the time, and the owner asked me to launch a product, and I'd never done that before, but I was
nice.
interested in the business side. He had a lot of faith in me. Not sure if it was founded well, but he had a lot of faith. So from there, built my first product inside of the company,
Nice.
and made a ton of mistakes. Learned a
Hmm.
lot of expensive and time consuming lessons, but they were all really good. So after that product launch, they approached me and asked if I wanted to take on like an product innovation role.
Nice.
Um, we didn't have a formal process or any process at that point. So basically went around and looked at some of our sister businesses, figured out what they did, and then created like a framework that is iteratively getting better and better.
Hmm.
But and so I'm in that role now. I've kind of moved up. We've hired a couple more people on the team, and I've launched a few more products. But that's
Nice.
where I sit in the healthcare, and basically creating software for hospitals, pharmacies, and kind of extending to manufacturers at some point.
So you're this is like the start of your career. You've just gotten into working, or have you
No,
been
no, I've been doing it
well?
for a while now. Yeah, so that was over the course of about 10 years, give or take. Yeah, I
Hmm.
just condensed it all really quickly. So it was like a couple of years of development after I graduated, and I graduated late because I played in a band for like ten
Oh yeah,
years. Yeah, so
nice.
yeah, we never
Any of your
made.
stuff out there on the on Spotify that I can download?
It's not yet, but I keep getting hounded by my friends and fans that we had in the past that are I consider friends now, to put it up there. So I'll put it up there at some point and shoot you a
Cool.
message when we do that. But no,
Yeah, that'd be great. I definitely
we
I want to hear your stuff.
yeah, we were more the MySpace era than the Spotify era, so a little older. But so yeah, that's kind of where and I worked the whole time we were in the band. So like I just did other types of jobs. But as far as like where my career started, I think it was kind of after that reset and finishing up there. So I joined this company. I guess it hasn't quite been 10 years. It was like 2012. So
Mhm.
around nine
So
years.
so your first product launch sort of propelled you into the innovation space because
Yeah.
how did you start with this product? Was it your brainchild, or did somebody come to you and say, "Hey, we need to build this"?
Yeah, so actually, it was the brainchild of the founder of the company that I worked for at the time,
Hmm.
and so he
Hmm.
had the vision for it, and but we had no idea how to do it because startups. When I joined, I was the eighth employee, right? So the
Yeah.
vision, he's the product manager, he's driving the sales, the founders. We had two founders, and both of them kind of shared in that role. And so you grow the organization really, really quickly. At some, at some points we were growing like 25% like a month
Wow.
in
Nice.
revenue, which is intense. So you expand from 8 people to 25, then to 50, 75. So when we were around the 60 to 75% mark is when he approached me and asked me to do this. Well, now you've got all these people who are not part of a true startup, right? They've got kind of a different mindset, and your organization is getting too big to wrap your hands around. So that's where I made a lot of the mistakes, was just taking things on myself, that hero conflicts that some of us have and have to fight every day. And so it was his vision, and it was based off a couple of prototypes that we had built. So it wasn't just some completely wild notion. It was our existing market, new technology, but related to what we did. So, and
So
then
you're saying, sorry, the
right.
original product, was that a startup? So you said it was a startup, and you grew to sort of larger than a startup. Then you're now you're creating startup products inside your startup. So your startup is no longer a startup. So it's like a startup.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I should clarify. So we had a flagship product that was incredibly successful, and that was the one that was growing us 25% revenue
Right.
in some month, not every month, but there were crazy months that we had. And
Fantastic.
so,
I mean, really, anybody can count those kind of numbers. How did
yeah,
you?
no,
What's that?
I mean, it was, definitely at the time, you're working so many hours, you don't even think about the success until you
Yeah.
get a second to breathe, right? And so yeah, it was around like 3 years into the company at that point that I had been there, and the company had been around for about a year and a half before I joined.
Mm-hmm.
So we're now at roughly four years, and
Wow,
that's when. What's that?
that's hardly anything. You still are a startup, basically.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, we did get acquired by a much bigger company, but it's one of the bigger companies that lets you be autonomous and keep your culture for a while. They just see
Very
that.
cool.
Yeah. So we grew from. So when we were bought, we were at $1 million in recurring revenue yearly, with 8 people, and I guess like 8 years later, we're now at 100 million
Nice.
recurring. So they definitely saw the right company to buy, right? That's crazy investment numbers that they've turned around. So, but yeah. So the kind of going back to your previous question, the product that I built and kind of took on that innovation, that was meant to kind of start to build out from our core product. We had one that was our breadwinner, Flagship. Everybody identified with that. Sorry. Cat's joining
Yeah, that
us.
looks just like our neighborhood cat.
Hopefully it's not.
Like, what's it doing all the way over there?
So they wanted to start to expand the business, right? And so I don't think they had done that either. Leadership had not done that at this point. So they were figuring it out as well. So basically we launched that product, and it was really the first secondary product to our first one. And then they said, okay, like, we're tied to this one specific space, and it's called 340B is what I work in. So I don't know if you know anything about healthcare, and I won't get into the details, but if anyone on the podcast that listens recognizes 340B, it's a niche place in healthcare. So they said, we've built this capability, we've built these competitive advantages. We need to diversify our market and start to reach other hospitals that don't participate in 340B. So then that's when they approached me and said, okay, we want you to start ideating and coming up with ideas rather than taking this one idea and executing it. And honestly, that is a much better fit for me, because I like the creation, I like the conversations, I like finding problems and solving them. I don't like the rigor of 2 years into the project. Now you're managing this enhancement request, and like, is it more important than this request? I can do that work, but it's not really where I thrive. I thrive on, all right, here's an idea, here's a prototype, it works, here's the market demand, let me go back to the next idea.
Yeah.
So they found a good place for me, thankfully, and I learn new stuff every day, which is what keeps me interested. So yeah, to your point, it's kind of like the innovation centers that some of Anthem and some of these bigger companies have built, right?
Mhm.
except those tend to get kind of lost in the mix. I've heard a lot of different feedback around those, that they end up not being what they envisioned, and they're not really driving new revenue. They end up supporting the existing business.
Yep.
So we basically created a cyclical approach to it, to where we measure each one with scorecards and say, is this in that upper right quadrant of new business, new market, and new product? And that's where we're constantly pushing the envelope, right?
Nice. Can you tell me a little bit about the process? Like, how does a idea get started? I mean, like, does it come in through one of your other employees, or do you envision it, or how does it start, and how does it go
Yeah.
through the process to get to development? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that we're constantly working on. So the answer is all of the above, right? And so what we're trying to combat is in a lot of companies, there's an executive who has an idea, and he or she loves that idea.
Yep.
And so that idea gets backed and kind of gets pushed through all of the processes, and then it turns out it's not a great idea, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so we cull ideas from customers. We've built this a panel of, and we call it innovation panel. And so we meet about every month, and we just toss a topic out there and let them talk about it. And they tell us, and so then we start to write down ideas. We, in all of our email signatures, we have a place for them to submit new ideas. We do hackathons, right? Of course, everyone does hackathons, but they can be beneficial if you approach them in the right way. A lot of the ideas I have come up with, not to pat myself on the back on the podcast here, but yeah, I think it's from any and everywhere. And then what we try to do is create the process so that they all get evaluated under the same criteria, so that we're truly making sure that we're pursuing the best opportunities. And I'm sure you've heard the notion of failing fast. So we try to fail fast. It's hard because if it's your idea, if it's my idea and I'm attached to it, I don't want it to fail. I don't want it to fail fast. So getting your ego out of the way and identifying that it's a good thing if it fails fast and not a bad thing is something you kind of have to get over in these types of roles.
Right. So so you start off with the idea, and then what do you do next? You just do you validate it? Like what are criteria for validation? You said you were filtering. How do you, like, what kind of criteria do you use to filter the ideas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously, like, when we look at it in three different capacities. One is feasibility, right? So is this something that we can handle technology wise? Is it something that is really in the realm of possibility? Two, is it makes sense for our business, right? We're a software business. That's how we made a lot of money. Everyone is always telling us 340B needs more consulting. You should have a consulting arm. It doesn't make sense for us to have consulting. So we toss that idea out, right? It doesn't really align with the business. And then now that you put me on the spot, I can't remember the last one, but I've got tons of different slides where I've talked about all this internally. But there's a third aspect that we look at. And if it kind of passes that sniff test, then we have a slide, just a PowerPoint slide, very basic. And it's just one slide. So it lays out the problem, it lays out the competitors, it lays out all the different pieces. And there's different versions of this on the internet. We just created our own because we have some internal metrics that we like to tie into that. And so you want to do, we've allocated about 4 to 8 hours of work for that first slide. So we get the idea in, we do the sniff test, and just take a look at it. And we literally discuss it. Every single person that submits an idea, we spend 30 minutes on the phone with them, whether it's a customer, internal stakeholder, CEO. They send us an idea, and we talk to them and get a feel for it and make sure that they really feel that they're listened to, especially if it's a customer, right? And so we have that, do the sniff test, and then 4 to 8 hours is the max we want to spend on putting that PowerPoint together. So we're not doing any demand validation. We're not going out into the market and saying, the innovation panel allows us to do that sometimes, but we try to make sure that that time is really efficient and we're using it well. So typically 4 to 8 hours, you're just going out looking to see what's in the market. And then we present that, we have an idea, and then we present it internally. So we have a series of escalating phases, and this isn't some concept we came up with, right? It's on Wikipedia, there's a stage gate there. But again, every organization looks different. So ours is, we build it out. We don't look at any financials. we build a rough TAM, like back of the napkin, and present it. And then to leadership, and leadership says, okay, this has got legs. We like it. move it to the next phase. And so then the next phase, obviously you're just going through and figuring out demand validation. Is this a problem for one hospital or pharmacy, or is it a problem for 200? And what does that mean? And so then we continue to build the business cases, get into prototyping. I don't think this is some unique concept to us, like I say, but having the discipline around it is really important because, like I say, you get emotionally attached to ideas. I was talking to a colleague the other day, and he was expressing a problem that he has product managers, and they get so attached to their products, and so it's actually better for them to fail the product, move on, and find another product to manage, but they get so attached. And I told him it's emotional. Like when you're a product manager or you're building a product, it starts to, especially people like me, it just consumes your thought processes in your life. And so you do start to see part of your work identity and your success in this idea. So it can be difficult to let go, but part of it is sticking to that process and letting it go if it needs to be let go. And I've had a few that hurt. I'll be honest, where leadership.
I believe it.
I don't think.
But you don't even. I mean, do you actually assign it to a product manager before it's been like vetted to go into prototype? So you do.
No. So we'll do the prototype. So yeah. So and I should have brought slides with me. I'm so used to presenting with slides. It's all off the top of my head. But basically, we've got each stage has the stakeholders that you start involving. Mm-hmm. So the first one is just us and leadership, innovation and leadership, right? And they give us a thumbs up. Then we start talking to IT and say, okay, we know this is feasible. What are we looking at roughly in terms of sprint hours? Like how many sprints will it take, right? And then you start to make it more and more reality. You talk to support. Is this just a normal product you're going to support? So then we've got built-in costs. We know it's going to be 3 people sitting for a full year, and you just check that box. You know how much that costs. Mm-hmm. So basically at the third stage is where we started involving product managers, because what we found is a couple of products we launched, they came in too late. So I was viewed, or the other innovation people that were handing off the projects were viewed as the subject matter experts. And that's problematic in an organization because now everyone comes to me with every question. I'm trying to go on to the next idea. Product manager doesn't really know it. So we started involving product owners and product managers at that third stage when we've moved past the prototyping, and we start really deciding when we're going to put it in future plans. So we're usually booked up about 6 months out where we don't have any room to build anything. So that handoff is problematic, and every product is slightly different, right? Some are very, very technical. Some are easier. So we've had to get better at that. That was a really good question though, because it's almost like you identified a problem that we figured out 2 years after we started this. So very insightful.
That's the whole thing. It's like, when do you, I mean, I encountered this problem throughout my career. It's the same thing. It's like you have an innovative product. It's really, really interesting. There's a lot of legs behind it, but when do you move it from, innovation to the rest of the organization? And that tipping point, like when does it go? If it goes too early, then it's not defined enough. If it goes too late, then in a lot of cases, there's no place in the organization for it to go to. Have you ever had that problem? Or, I mean, you don't have that issue?
No, we actually have that problem right now. Like, so the product that is consuming my life right now is very, very complex. And because of healthcare and data rights and some issues there, basically we're going into a brand new market, but we have to tap into our existing customer base and do it on their behalf to this new market, offer a solution. I won't say much more than that, but the idea is that we now are selling into 2 different markets, one that we've never sold into before. And we needed basically a role where someone could come in and be the mini CEO, right? Be that initial startup person for this product. We didn't have the right person internally, and we decided that it would take 6 months to get someone externally up to speed. Because it's very, very technical and complex. So I'm wearing that hat right now. So to your point, it's not always going to be, if it's a simple, easy product that's an add-on to an existing one, or, kind of the same product in a new market, that kind of stuff is easy to hand off. But brand new market, brand new technology, like we're embracing now, I've kind of actually had to put my innovation stuff on the back burner
Mhm.
and really focus on this as the main driver in the organization.
Yeah.
So
Well, sometimes you have to do that to help shepherd it in because there's nobody to take it on.
yeah,
So it's something
absolutely.
mentioning the when do you actually get into the numbers? Because I know there's other organizations that actually have to do like a whole lean canvas before they ever do anything. I mean, do you get, it sounds like you get into the numbers a little bit later. Is that true?
Yeah, we do. So we start getting and we build full like profit models, right? So we take a look at the market. We think we could reason this is the value we're generating, and we can reasonably take 3 to 7% depending on the offering and where it would sit, et cetera. And so from there we map out all of the costs. So we do build a full blown analysis, but that
Mhm.
doesn't happen until we've reached the second stage is where we do an initial pass at it. And then when we're going into the prototyping, and there's really being, if you think about it from leadership, they want to know when they're starting to spend resources and invest into it. So that's where they really start analyzing the financials more clearly. We
Mhm.
do build a TAM. There's a TAM initially, and then there's like a breakdown of the target address, the total addressable market, and
Yep.
kind of the space in between that we build in the second phase. But we don't really do financials until we're at that third phase.
Right. So it takes a while, and then of course at that point it could also get killed because the financials don't look
Yeah.
good enough, and they're
We
like,
we've
man,
had a couple like
it's
that.
so cool.
Yeah, we had one that was really compelling in terms of because working in healthcare, there's also like other pieces to consider, like patient outcomes, right? And so we've had conversations where I've heard people who will remain unnamed say something like, "Well, that would be great, but patient outcomes are not as important as the bottom line," right? And
Mm,
no one internal to our company, but I've had that conversation. And when you work in healthcare, I think you have to put sometimes things above profit, right? And so
yeah.
there are things that, we did launch a product that for 2 or 3 years we lost money on intentionally because it was helping our hospitals basically provide an assistance program for patients that were underinsured or uninsured. So I think that plays into it a good bit in our space. Obviously, everyone is going to want to conduct themselves morally, ethically,
Mhm.
but in our situation, we really have to sometimes understand that we're doing the right thing to directly help patients. So the
Yeah.
financials may not be um, as attractive as we'd like them to be, right?
Right. Although, I mean, if you ask me, it doesn't matter if you're in healthcare. That's exactly how you should operate your business, right? It's
Agreed. But I think it's just a little bit more clear if you're selling a car, you know what I mean, and
yeah,
safety aside, like you're like, it's not that important, even though it's impacting someone, it's not their health, right? So if you
yeah,
literally say, oh, well, we're not going to make as much money if this person doesn't get the drugs that they need,
right.
it makes that a distinction a little clearer in my experience.
Mhm. So it sounds like your leadership is pretty open to new ideas and innovations. Have you ever had a situation where they've like pushed something back that you thought was like a really good idea and you've been able to like help to move it forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a give and take, right? And especially in a big organization, they're risk averse, so everyone talks the talk, and
Yeah.
we want to be innovative, right? And then when it comes down to making that investment, I think we've been lucky enough to actually have a few key leaders that really do walk the walk, right, and not just talk the talk.
Mhm.
But there've been a couple of one of them was one of the ones I talk about where I came up with it, so I'm really excited about it, and it got shot down. And the basically the feedback we got was that it was too big of an idea,
Mm.
which hurts even more, right? Because they tell you push that envelope, keep going up to that upper right quadrant. So if you draw right up in that top upper right, and they tell you, "Whoa, dial it back a little bit,"
Yeah.
kind of stings. I get the reasons why, but I think it's one of those things that maybe killing an idea at that point is not the appropriate response. You could say, okay, let's take bite-sized pieces of it and try to. So we actually did that organically, but yeah, we've had a few that were I thought were really solid ideas that got killed. Sometimes for financial reasons, right? The
Mm.
TAM just isn't big enough. Why would we go chase something like this? Or it dilutes our margins. So we're a software company, so our margins are pretty solid, especially compared to kind of our existing existing physical businesses, manufacturing and so on. So if we bring an idea where the margins are lower and there's not really a compelling strategic component to it, it will get shot down. So, but it does, you know, you have to weigh all of the opportunity costs as well. So I will say that that's been one of our biggest struggles is we love coming up with ideas, getting them from, so we churn through the ideas, and then we were just presenting the ideas. They were green lighting them. Everything was going great. And then we just ran into like this complete train wreck of having no resources to do anything because we greenlit everything that was a solid idea. And then everybody was trying to build 16 different products. And we didn't, so we invested in one additional Scrum team, but all the other resources that were supposed to be there helping out, just so we realized that we needed to, as we started to look at these, there's opportunity costs. So we can only choose one of these four because we just got so happy with the innovation process. We were just so excited and killing it.
Well, ideally, what you want to do is staff up and have like four additional teams so you can just do everything.
I know. Well, since the day they gave me this job, I've been asking for my own Scrum team because to me, there's just so many, especially if you're trying to truly innovate. If you have to wait 6 months before you can start building something, and we've seen that hurt us and hold us back. So we're still having that conversation, my manager and us. I'm sure he's tired of it, but yeah, I think just a small, like 3 to 4 person Scrum team with just the key people that kind of can catch on to that vision. Really, it would be like a tiny little startup, right? You've got a small Scrum team.
I'm a big proponent of that. I mean, the only downside of that is that it still separates you from the rest of the organization, right? So you still have that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's even more difficult to do that transition to the rest, because I know when I was working with Yahoo, we had the same sort of issues where we had an innovation group called Brickhouse. They were in a completely different place. They were a completely different nation, completely different sets of folks, a completely different set of developers, no connection with the rest of the organization. And they would churn out some amazing stuff, and they would get to non-scalable product. So they got it to the point where it could almost be productized. Right. And then they say, okay, this is really cool, and we want to move forward with it. Here you go, rest of the organization, take it on. And they're like, oh my God, I can't do anything with this. I got to rewrite it from scratch. And I'm like, whoa. Hold on a second.
That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I need to definitely keep that in mind because I've been pushing so hard for the Scrum team. I probably would walk blindly into that issue. So, okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the key thing is that as long as the big problem they had was they weren't looking at it from a agile, design thinking. Let's rip this out as quickly as possible. So they weren't even using the same platform. They weren't using the same tools. They weren't using the same anything. They were just like rapidly prototyping it and getting it out. And then the problem is that they would have had to rewrite the code completely to get it, to productize it. And if your Scrum team is just basically they understand what they want. They understand the inputs that the rest of the organization is looking for. Then they're not going to make the mistake of building something that's just for prototype or just for the innovation group. That it is a productizable thing, and all they really need to do is add the scale piece or whatever else there is. The only danger though there is that it could work the other way around. Is if you have a really good team that's churning out products, when they get busy, they might come to you and say, "Hey, can we get you to work on our core systems? Because we're short on resources." So you have to be very protective of making sure that they're out. So it's funny, resources are so scarce everywhere that people will grab them. So you have to protect them.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's probably part of the reason why they segregated them in your organization, right? Is because they didn't want them getting sucked into the. Because I mean, when you've got
you don't want that sort of us versus them mentality. You have to like stay together. So it probably would have been better if we stayed in the same place and just sort of integrated and worked together, even physically. I mean, of course, prior to COVID, everybody was sitting amongst each other, but not anymore.
Yeah, definitely not at this point. That's awesome. Yeah, that's super interesting.
That you've come across that you've been able to sort of defeat, that you could, like, some advice you could give to other corporate innovators who are trying to push these things through the system, and maybe they're in organizations that their leadership is less prone to approve things.
Yeah, I missed the very first part of that. I think I was talking over you.
Okay, so do you have any other suggestions or on how
Oh,
to deal
gotcha.
with the challenges of other organizations? Like, it sounds like your leadership is pretty open to new ideas and new thinking. I mean,
Yeah.
if you were, would you have any suggestions on what to do in other places, like other corporate innovators who might not have as open-minded leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things, and this hasn't always been, an easy process, right? And so one of the things I would say is really finding ways to connect with a leader and getting a champion for a specific idea or product, right? So you get that backing and support behind an idea that, I kind of went through earlier. An executive has an idea, and so he or she is pushing it. So you get some of that backing behind the idea and the product without, but you know that it's actually a viable and good idea. I think
Mhm,
that's one way to do it. And the other is tough, but just prove yourself.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so, like, show results, and then you start to get the trust of the organization. But typically, if an organization is hiring someone in an innovation role, unless it's the vision of middle management or somebody that, is kind of a lone wolf in that executive team, they're typically going to have some sort of backing. So it's really about execution. But I think all of the stuff that we've talked about throughout the podcast, all the traps that I fell into, some of the things that you talked about, those are the ones where if you can learn those lessons and fine tune it for your organization before you realize that the product management should have been involved, you know, 3 months ago, or oh crap, we didn't talk to legal, we forgot about them, and we work in healthcare, so now we're delayed for another 2 months while we figured out the legal pieces of it.
yeah.
um, some of our lessons were harder learned than others, I'll say that. So I think process, establish it, follow it, be willing to change it, find leaders that support it, and you should have one or two out there, even if it is an organization that is not really innovative at this point, and then show results.
Mhm.
Really, the key three things that I would say.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the word results and not specifically say, profitability or any of specific one of those
Yeah,
things, because it really depends on the organization, right? It depends on what the leadership is looking for. Like you said, I mean, you could be looking at patient outcomes, you could be looking at profitability, you could be looking at, it's really what they're looking for. And you probably should start with some, quick wins to say, okay, this, we've hit this, we've hit this, we've hit this. You create a sort of a track record of success in meeting those criteria, and then you can start going off and doing those upper quadrant ideas that are a little bit more edgy.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I will say, I had the luxury of being kind of in the migration of a startup to a more established company. And in the midst of that, I got my little, like product that I got to build. Like I say, tons of mistakes, tons of lesson learned, but that gave me the ability to prove myself. And it's not incredibly successful product, I'll be honest. Like, compared to our flagship product, it is it's very low on the totem pole in terms of revenue and everything. And some people still complain about the way it got rolled out. But we didn't have the resources for it. But I think that is a positive result, to your point, right? Maybe
Yeah.
not the best, but it is something that I can hang my hat on and say, okay, like, trust me, we're going to get there. So yeah, absolutely, the results are going to be different organization to organization. Like, the results at Chick-fil-A, I imagine, are vastly different than Wendy's, right? They have a
Right.
completely different set of stakeholders that they're accountable to, different things that management care about, and so it's going to be different organization to organization for sure.
Exactly. So you've worked in a startup, and now that you've been sort of bought up and acquired, you're working in a larger organization. Which one do you
Yep.
prefer?
I mean, I want to keep my job, but I would say I prefer a startup. Hopefully, my boss doesn't see this and tell
You
me.
get the startup bug in you, do you?
I do a little bit, and then I think back to, like, working at 2 in the morning and then waking up for a customer call at 8 a.m. and I'm like, maybe I'm getting a little too old for all that. So I do recognize, but I think I'm kind of living the best of both worlds now, right? I get the creative components. I get to think about problems and solutions in a different way. I also don't have to worry about, at one point, when we were a startup, the founder wasn't sure if he was going to be able to pay everyone's salaries one month, right? And so there's comfort in that too. So I think right now I'm really happy where I'm at. I'm able to bridge the best of both worlds, at least as far as the things that I really enjoyed of being in a startup. But yeah, I do have that bug. Sometimes I'll see something on like a job posting with like 8 employees, and I'll get wistful for those days,
Mhm.
because there's really nothing like being 8 or 10 people completely in sync, completely focused. You're up working at midnight, but so is the founder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's just this like camaraderie and like teamwork aspect that you'd never recreate under any
Yeah.
circumstances. So
Yeah, exactly. And would you do another healthcare thing, or is there another space you think that's hot?
I mean, I think honestly, healthcare in the United States is broken at this point,
Mm.
and there's many. So I do have a few ideas to disintermediate some of the problematic aspects of healthcare that I see.
Yeah.
They're two big ideas, I think, is what the feedback that I would get if I were to pitch them internally. So I think my passion is probably around healthcare, just because I see so many problems, right? So I see problems, I want to solve them. Aside from that, I'm also getting a master's degree, and on top of my
Congrats. That's
job.
great.
Thank you. Yeah. Some weeks I feel better about it than others, depending on the workload. But
You've
one of
been
the
out
things
of
that,
school for a while, and then you go back to school. You're like, oh my god, this is a lot of work.
yeah, I was like, I don't remember all this homework and projects. I thought I would just coast in here, but I'm learning R as a result of one of the
Oh,
classes, and so
fantastic!
some
How do
big
you
data.
finding that? How are you
I,
finding
I
that?
love it. So as a guy that was a SQL developer, I think the syntax is wonky as can be. And
Mhm.
so then I read that it was actually created by like mathematicians, not people that code. And I was like, okay, that makes
Exactly.
a lot more sense. But I do enjoy it because one of the first things I discovered about SQL is that it didn't at the time. I still think it doesn't, but Microsoft SQL didn't have a mode function. I tried to type in mode, and I was looking for, and it didn't have it in there. So when you start really thinking about advanced statistical analysis, like so far, I've never encountered anything that does it as well as R. And it'll just go through like millions of records and spit out all of these statistics. And the hard part is interpreting them and making sure that your variables are right. So that's what I'm learning about. But yeah, I like the first week. I was like, I don't know how this is going to work out. But once you get a feel for it,
Yeah.
it's going a lot better. So I love it, and I think that's the only other place where I could see myself ending up, which there's plenty of room for that in healthcare, right? Big data and kind of taking what retail sites and retail companies are doing a really good job of, and almost everyone else seems to be lagging behind, and then really starting to build. Social media does a good job as well
Yeah.
of profiling all of us, but I think that's where the industries are heading, right? And you'll just start to get to this point of refinement with true data science and analytics that we've never even been able to scrape the surface of before.
Yeah.
So,
And there's so much data out there, we still don't really know what to do with it.
oh, I know. Yeah. Because, yeah, my teacher asked us to pick something for a project, and I came up with like 15 things on the spot. And you can just go to Kaggle and get all this. He told us no Kaggle. He wants us to clean the data and have the real world experience of having to sort through and get rid of records and figure out what's good. And I was like, I've done that plenty in my career. Can I just bypass that, please? But
Well, I read SQL is like the number one most in demand language now. Did you know that?
really, I did not know that.
Yeah. I
I
think
guess
it
that makes
like
sense.
surpassed I mean, it used to be Java at some point, but now it's
Mhm.
surpassed even Java. And I'm thinking, why is that? Why is that possible? And I think what's happened is that we've taught so many people the NoSQL route that there's now a shortage of SQL people who are into SQL, who know SQL. And I'm like,
Yeah.
is that possible? I guess it is, right?
Yeah, I guess we've been telling database developers like SQL's dying, like you need to go
Yeah.
to NoSQL. Yeah, I guess that's what's been happening. So everybody's like, oh, my career is stalling. I got to go over here and learn this new platform. Or you're a college student, they're like, SQL is what my dad did.
Yeah.
So I want to learn the next thing. But yeah, it's not going to go away for sure anytime soon. But I did not realize that. I hadn't heard that. That's an
Yeah,
interesting.
my son's a developer, and he went to coding school, coding boot camp, and they taught
Okay.
him JavaScript and NoSQL, and they didn't teach him SQL at all. And then he's got a gig now where he's trying to do SQL, and he has to learn SQL from
Yeah.
scratch. And I did some research, and it's like, I thought Python and R, Python is, of course, it's heading up there pretty fast. But
Right.
I was so stunned to see SQL there, and I'm like, that's crazy.
That is interesting. I mean, maybe I should dabble out and go back into the development if it's that high in demand, go be a back end
Oh,
developer
no,
again.
development. I used to be a developer too. I mean,
Okay.
I did like I did like Visual Basic and basic, like way back. And then about around the times Twitter started,
Okay.
I started getting into Ruby and Ruby on Rails.
Oh
Because,
yeah.
to like rip out real quick prototypes, and that was interesting. And then I got out of it again, and now I'm thinking, oh, should I go back and learn Python or something?
Yeah. Python's easy as far as I'm concerned compared to like
Yeah,
Java.
that's true. I thought
Yeah,
it was pretty easy, and it is sort of like a data science thing too. Like a lot of people are
yep.
using Python and R together
Yep.
to do all the analysis. So that's very cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I get that some days when I'm really stressed at work and there's I'm just like, or I'm in a meeting and I'm like, this is bureaucracy at its finest. And I'm like, man, I could just go back to being a developer where it's someone else's full-time job to make sure that I work all day and I'm not in meetings, right? I get my 15-minute stand up and then there's literally another full-time person who says, leave him alone and let him do his job.
Yes.
That sounds appealing some days for sure.
I know, right?
But
as long as you have that 15-minute stand up, and then the rest of the day you're like coding. That's all
you're just working and you're not in meetings. You're not,
got your headphones on, got your tunes, got your big screens.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, there are days that I get wistful for that too, but there is, an end to that growth as well, right? I think you could, argue that. So what I really excel on, interestingly enough, is chaos and change. So that's where I really feel most comfortable and picking like things out, whether it's processes or whatever it is in the midst of all that. That's where I really find myself the happiest. So
yeah. Well, I think you got to have that kind of mindset where you see that change and chaos is happening and you don't like freak out. You kind of embrace it. You say, okay, hey, you know what? this is a challenge. This is not going to knock me down. I'm like, how am I going to deal with this? So I think you've got to have that certain mindset that goes, when this comes to me, I'm not going to freak out. I'm not going to, blow up. I'm just going to go, okay, here's a problem I need to solve. Let me figure it out. Yeah,
absolutely. And not to divulge too much about my background, but as a kid, I grew up, my dad was a missionary. So I lived in Peru, grew up in South America and Mexico for a year. But when I turned 20, I realized that I had lived in like 22 different houses. So just like before the age of 20. So we constantly were moving and almost like a military lifestyle, but it was on the religious side. So I think maybe that's what like created my love of just change and chaos and meeting and new people, making new friends all throughout those stages.
That's really interesting. I was interviewing just a couple of interviews ago. I was interviewing someone. She called herself an army brat, and she was just like that, moving from place to place to place.
Oh yeah.
I said, did that prepare you for a life in innovation and chaos and change? She goes, yeah, maybe. It's probably because if you got used to that, then when new things came along, because a lot of people, they can't handle it, right? The change comes along.
They don't like the change,
right?
Yeah.
Like for you and her, it was probably more like, oh, more change. Hey, you know what? I've been there, done that. I can handle it.
Yeah. Or you feel like antsy if you don't have some change, right? Like
exactly.
Like you're almost like something's wrong. Yeah, I freak out when things just are normal day to day. So
awesome. All right, so let's talk about the future. So it's 2031.
Oh wow.
What are things like? What are things like in 10 years?
Things in
healthcare, in development, in the startup world, in innovation. Where are things going to be in 10 years?
That's a really interesting question. I wasn't prepared for that one. I think healthcare. It's so difficult to say. There's just, I hate the concept of too big to fail, right? So if like, to me, too big to fail doesn't fit into capitalism. Like those two are at odds with each other. So the concept of capitalism is for wealth to fail and then get rebuilt. So if you have too big to fail, then it breaks the concept. Yeah. So I feel like there's a lot of government interweaved into healthcare that has created some problems. I'm not going to say that the government should not be involved. It's just that they stepped in awkward ways and created a lot of challenges that ended up driving costs unintentionally. I don't think it was an intentional effect.
Right. Right.
So I have no clue where healthcare is going to be in 10 years. I'm not going to
Well, do you
make
think
that
there's going to
up.
be more government intervention? Do you think 10 years from now we'll have socialized medicine? There'll be like government oversight of all this stuff? Or do you think we're going to sort of flip and go back to more of a corporate private model?
I mean, I think depending on who's in office, they attempted a first step in the direction, and then all of that got like completely ousted. That I mean, and since the elections are so cyclical, I don't see any real progress being made towards that vision, right? And you hear both good anecdotal and bad anecdotal stories about socialized healthcare, right? So depending on who you're talking to on Facebook or in the street, the way we used to do things, when we could go outside, that one person is going to have an anecdotal horror story about someone who sat in a Canadian emergency room for 36 hours or something. And someone will have some other miracle story where they cured their cancer in Canada just because it was socialized medicine. And so I think the problem is the division that exists on the two sides, right? And so I think real hard data that could tell us what is best and then the path that we could follow, right? So if we talk about some of the advanced data science concepts that we could take and look at a population and figure out what the best path is. But I think at this point, we're just so entrenched in the current systems that some things have to be broken, and not in necessarily a positive way. It could create some pain for them to get reset. Like you hear a lot about drug pricing in the news. People don't truly understand what drives those things, but there's mechanisms in healthcare that I think have to be broken to be able to get back to a point of normalcy, right? And I don't know if that's going to happen in 10 years. I imagine some progress will be made, but it's a mess now. Like,
there's almost too many cooks in the kitchen, right? There's too many people who are sort of living off of the system the way it is. It's kind of like the same with education, with talent acquisition. There's all these things that, we know they're broken. We can stand on the outside and we can look at them and go, they're broken. And we go, why can't the people on the inside figure out that these are broken and fix them? But there's just too many parties on the inside that are okay with the status quo, and they just want to continue to perpetuate it. So, unless there's some kind of, like you say, there has to be some disruptive thing has to happen for things to change. It's kind of like us and working from home. Like we were all able to work from home, years ago. The technology was there, but if we didn't have, if COVID didn't come along, it wouldn't have forced us to work from home. So it's almost like we need some kind of black swan thing to happen in the healthcare space, which unfortunately, since it's healthcare, is probably not going to be a good thing.
It's going to be a negative impact. Like I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't know what that is or what it looks like, but I think that's something that has to take place. And to your point, I think about this a lot. Like, I said something to my wife along the lines of like, my job exists because there's a part of healthcare that was broken 30 years ago. The government stepped in and tried to help out and unintentionally created this effect. And so basically my job and the ideas that I come up with for the most part are all a cropping of that problem. Right. And so I think about ways to solve the problem, but I'm just a guy doing his job some days, right? At the end of the day. And there's so many other people, to your point, that aren't necessarily evil or have bad intentions or want to do their job in a way that hurts other people. They're just unintentionally byproducts, and their jobs and the existence of their jobs is a byproduct. But the military has a lot of those issues too, right? Because the military budget in the U.S. is so high. So there's so many things that are superfluous to what needs to be happening, and contractor jobs. And again, I'm not being political or criticizing here, just one of the news stories that you hear about commonly. So, I don't know. I want something to happen, a change to happen. Like I said, I've got some big ideas to disintermediate. But executing those, just going up against the vast forces that exist and in some cases almost monopolies in the verticality that exists in healthcare.
Yeah,
is daunting to say the least. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, awesome. This has been great. Thank you so much. This is a fantastic conversation. So tell us a little bit how if somebody wants to get in touch with you, but what's the best way?
Oh, I don't have like a website or anything, but I'm on LinkedIn. So you feel free. It's a LinkedIn. You can just look me up, Eli Scott.
Yeah, no, I can put your contact information in the, or I can put your profile in the.
That'd be great. And I think you can put my phone number too. So if somebody wants to call me, I'm not opposed to that. So.
All right.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you, sir. Chris. I'll grab you later. So have a great long weekend. Thanks so much.
You too, Chris. Appreciate it, man. All right. Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.